Welcome everybody. My name is Gunther Meyer. I'm a professor at Modul University here in Vienna, teaching regional economics and real estate. Those who have been with us from the very beginning know that I'm currently also the president of ERES. And I also have some history in the area of green buildings as one of the founders of the Austrian Green Building Council in 2009, if I remember correctly. So this is my background, and with that I would like to introduce our second panel. And in that second panel, we'll move from the more financial perspective of the first panel over to more of the building, the real estate perspective. And we have two presenters in this panel, so we'll have plenty of time for discussions, especially since I'm not presenting. Was usually always taking up all the time. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Seema Issar from DGNB, from the German Green Building Council. Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I'm going to share my screen and my presentation now. I hope you can see my presentation.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much for this invitation to also present the study we conducted with our system partners at the beginning of this year, evaluating the market readiness of the EU taxonomy criteria to the buildings, and also the market readiness of the real estate market in Europe. Maybe just a brief introduction to myself. My name is Seema Issar. I'm working with the German Sustainable Building Council. There I'm managing the buildings in use subject and also the sustainable finance themes and topics. So everything concerning the EU taxonomy, you can definitely reach out to me there. Now, we've heard in the first panel already a lot about sustainable finance. We know that Europe wants to be a climate neutral continent by 2050, and that's why they have set out a lot of regulations for the banking and finance sector, because somehow this transformation has to be also financed. So we know that the sustainable investments must increase significantly, and in order to do that, we also need companies visualizing their external costs in the balance sheets, because currently these are not always visible there. And at the same time, qualities of sustainable investment must be defined so that there is comparability possible. Now, with that and the European Green Deal, there is the European Sustainable Finance Strategy, and we can recognize these three overall objectives I just mentioned in two regulations. One is the EU Taxonomy, which aims at classifying economic activities, thereby also defining qualities of sustainable investments. And we have different disclosure regulations, which were also mentioned in the first panel, where both financial market participants and also non-financial market participants will have to disclose their sustainability risks. Now, this means the EU taxonomy is actually trying to help define the sustainable investments, the qualities of sustainable investments, and the disclosure regulations are aimed at visualizing externalized costs, but also the risks, sustainability risks existent. Now, today I will be focusing more on the taxonomy part of it, and I think you've heard a lot of it, so I'm only going to briefly go into this again. Who is affected by the taxonomy and for whom is it relevant? actually, there are both financial market participants who will be affected by the taxonomy and its requirements, but also larger companies who must disclose according to different CSR regulations. And then we have European member states who will also obviously have to make sure that when they are bringing out new bonds which are classed as sustainable, that they also fulfill the taxonomy requirements. The general approach is that there are 6 environmental objectives, and every business activity can choose one of these sustainable environmental objectives to significantly contribute to, and then you will have 5 other environmental objectives you must also fulfill do no significant harm criteria to, and you must ensure social safeguards. So these are like minimum requirements which will be applicable to all different business activities who want to be aligned to the taxonomy. I think you've already seen what the actual criteria are. Here is an overview of the requirements for new construction and renovation. As I mentioned, there are the minimum requirements which ensure a social safeguard for the workers, but then there is also the substantial contribution to climate change mitigation, which means for new construction that the primary energy demand has to be 10% below the NZEB standard, certain air tightness and thermography tests must be passed, and then you also have to ensure that you're doing the life cycle greenhouse gas accounting, and then you have a whole range of do no significant harm criteria. I'm not going to go into those very deeply because I just briefly listened to the first panel, and I think we had one panelist already going into the do no significant harm criteria too. In acquisition and ownership, the requirements are less diverse. So we have, again, the minimum safeguard criteria. We have one substantial contribution to climate change mitigation, where you have to ensure that existing buildings either belong to the top 15% or have a energy label with class A. And then there is only one do no significant harm criteria you have to fulfill. Now, when we, as a Green Building Council, as a German Sustainable Building Council, with our partners in Austria and Denmark and Spain, started last year, you could actually say last year winter, we realized when the first draft criteria were published that there are a lot of challenges on the market, and there were challenges on one side to understand what the actual requirements of the EU taxonomy are in their business context, but then also there were difficulties to assessing how you could integrate these sustainability criteria in existing financing models or evaluation processes, and also in the risk analysis. And then there were also difficulties in, or challenges in, understanding and assessing the reliability of the sustainability criteria. So that's why we decided that we wanted to conduct a study to see and to answer the question if the proposed taxonomy criteria are actually applicable, and also if the market was ready to apply these criteria. And that is why we also decided to get together our project team. So as I mentioned before, we were working with the Green Building Council in Austria, the EGNI, and then the Denmark Green Building Council, and also GBC Spain. And with this, we had like a project team of these 4 organizations, and we're very happy to also have quite a lot of participants and different market businesses joining the study. And the overall objective of the study was actually to test the taxonomy requirements published at that time, and to evaluate whether the market is ready and how well applicable these proposed taxonomy criteria were. And we wanted to help market participants in preparing, both in the financial sector and also in the real estate sector, to build up capacity so that they can integrate these aspects into existing processes, because that is what it is all about when it comes to bringing sustainability risks into decision making. And then we also wanted to see and evaluate how high the effort is, what the costs and benefits are in order to identify these sustainability investments for the long term. And based on all these practical applications, we wanted to then also participate in the consultation phase from the European Commission, so that we have evidence-based recommendations to offer them and also to other national decision makers. Overall, we had 24 different participating companies in our study, and you can see there are both project developers within the participating companies, but also housing companies. We had operators, we had real estate mortgage banks, pension funds, and also investment and asset management companies, which means that we had actually market participants from the entire life cycle of a building. Here I have another graph just depicting. You can see we had nearly 30% of project developers, 25% investment and asset managers, and also 25% pension funds. And by having these varied participants within the study, we also got different viewpoints, and we understood the challenges from different sides, which was quite good for the study and for each other's learning as well. Then within the study itself, we also realized that there was the background knowledge was quite diverse. So some of the companies which were participating had already had or dealt with sustainability for a long time. So they had their own sustainability experts who were already evaluating the sustainability of buildings, who have certification as a standard procedure within their processes, and they already have integrated sustainability aspects within their activities. And then there were also companies with limited prior knowledge towards sustainability, and who also didn't understand yet what the relevance of the taxonomy actually is for their company, and who were trying to first understand how will the taxonomy become relevant for their company, and also then to understand what the actual requirements are. So with these participants, we then had also, we asked market participants to bring a few projects into the study. And altogether, we looked at 62 buildings in total. You can see on this map here that these buildings were located all over Europe. For new construction, we had 22 projects. For renovation, only 4 projects. And for the business activity acquisition and ownership, altogether 36 buildings. And you can see that a lot of these buildings were in Germany, but also in Denmark with 17 buildings, and then also Austria had quite a number of buildings. Then there is further statistics on the buildings. So we have both certified buildings which were participating in the study, but also non-certified buildings. The certified buildings were were mostly certified with the DGNB system, but there were also some LEED and BREEAM projects, and also from the building type. You can see this graph here below. There were a lot of office buildings and residential buildings in the new construction area, and acquisition and ownership too were mainly office buildings, but also some projects in retail, residential, logistic, and mixed-use buildings. Yeah, actually, I have another graph, or a little larger here, and with the different building types, so we could ensure that our results are not only based on one particular building use, especially in acquisition and ownership and new construction. The methods used were that we took the taxonomy requirements, which were published in the first draft of the technical expert group, and formulated them into a question. And these questionnaires were then handed out to our participants. The questionnaire not only included the requirements of the technical expert group, but we also asked questions on project information and minimum requirements, which the taxonomy also about the minimum requirements the taxonomy also asks for now. And then we had questions on the data availability, the data reliability, and effort and cost of each of answering each question. So data availability, we just wanted to see, and reliability is a big subject, because obviously based on the decision if a business activity is taxonomy aligned or not, and there will be financial consequences. So we want to ensure that when we are deciding whether a project is taxonomy aligned or not, we need to know how reliable the information is we are basing this information from. And effort and cost were asked because only then do we know how only then can we compare different companies with each other and see how processes within companies can be optimized to gain this information more quicker, and to see how the data is actually available. So now coming to the study results, we had actually 3 project deliverables, you could say. One was the market readiness report itself, which has been circulated widely. I think maybe you've already seen it. It was published in March this year. Then we also published a recommendation to the European Commission and also to the Sustainable Finance Platform that was part of the consultation phase in December 2020. I think that was very helpful, also not only for the market participants who were able to participate in the consultation, but also for learning processes to see how we can what needs to be optimized from defining the taxonomy requirements itself. And then for all the market participants who had submitted case studies, we had company-specific reports with the taxonomy checks and results and recommendations, which means that they submitted the questionnaires to us. We looked at all these questionnaires, and then we gave feedback on which building was actually taxonomy aligned, or why a building was not taxonomy aligned, and how the building could become or could transform into being taxonomy aligned. Mostly there was missing, or sometimes there was missing data, so actually no decision could actually be made. And sometimes it was just, if you're looking at benchmarks, that the building was not able to pass the benchmark. These company-specific reports are actually confidential because they were all building specific. The overall results showed for new constructions, where we were assessing 22 different buildings, that from the do no significant harm criteria, especially the climate change adaptation, pollution, and circular economy criteria were most difficult to be met. You can see that there was a lot of buildings which were not able to deliver the data needed to make an assessment. So you just couldn't decide whether the building is actually aligned to the requirements. Then we also realized the difference that non-certified projects mostly just didn't have enough data to make a decision. That was also mostly in the do no significant harm criteria. And then we also saw some country-specific differences, such as that Spanish projects and projects in Austria had more data on climate change mitigation and more difficulty in proving their eligibility in the do no significant harm area. We also then have an overview of the results for the acquisition and ownership part. There we saw, you can see in this graph already that a lot of projects were actually non-eligible. Actually, 60% of the projects were not eligible for the climate change mitigation criteria, which is obviously the criteria we chose for significant contribution. And the main reason was either that there was not enough data, because you actually need the primary energy demand data, so the demand-based energy performance certificate, or that if the primary energy demand data was available, that it didn't meet the benchmark of the taxonomy regulation. And then you can also see that a lot of data was non-eligible in the do no significant harm criteria. You might wonder, there is also do no significant harm pollution in ecosystems here. These requirements have obviously been cancelled out now in the final delegated act of the taxonomy criteria, but in the first draft there was still some requirements set for do no significant harm pollution and ecosystems. And we could also see that the certified projects here also had a better performance, so they were rated eligible more often than the non-certified projects. Now, if we look at the overall assessment results of the taxonomy checks based on new construction, renovation, and acquisition and ownership, you can see that new construction and renovation projects had least difficulty in proving eligibility. So they have so they had more documentation available. Then the non-eligibility was mainly because data was not available for the do no significant harm criteria. And when we're looking at acquisition and ownership, only 1/3 the projects could only prove their eligibility to 1/3 of the criteria actually. And as I already mentioned, it was either due to low performance or missing benchmarks, or that especially in Germany, there are two different types of energy performance certificates. We have the demand-based and also the consumption-based energy performance certificate. And existing building owners often only have the energy performance certificate, the consumption-based energy performance certificate available. So then that is not enough to do an assessment whether you're eligible for the taxonomy or not. And from the effort, we could also see big differences. There were companies which only took 4 hours to fill in the entire questionnaire, while other companies were taking their time in fulfilling the questionnaire, and also had to look where the data was actually stored. So then you can also see that the internal cost for different companies quite different and varying. So now if we look at the study results in terms of certification, we had, as I mentioned before, altogether 62 buildings, and from these 62 buildings, 26 buildings were certified, mainly with the DGNB certificate. And here we could prove that certified projects could prove their eligibility more often, and they were also more eligible in comparison to the non-certified buildings, because certified projects obviously mostly perform better, have a higher data reliability, because they are already checked during conformity assessment, and the data is just more accessible because you have everything together within the documentation for the certification. And that is also why the time and effort level is much lower for certified buildings in comparison to non-certified buildings. Okay, so concluding the main findings and recommendations, also for new construction and renovation, we could see that the mitigation criteria is not very ambitious, especially if you look at where we want to be in 2050. We want a climate neutral continent. In Germany, we need a climate neutral climate neutral existing buildings. So it is very necessary for the European Commission to set up a taxonomy roadmap, which is more ambitious, and to shift from the energy or from the targets for primary energy to actually climate metrics and climate targets. And at the same time, this means for the market that the market should prepare for more ambitious climate related targets. So they should not only aim to collect data on the primary energy demand, but also start setting up internal processes to gain insights on how the carbon emissions are, so that in case there is a switch to a new metric, that this data is just available. For existing buildings, we could see that only 1 in 6 buildings was able to meet around 2/3 of the data, and a lot of proof documents were missing, which means for the European Commission that the climate change mitigation criteria needs to be defined more, like the definition needs to be better, and also that the climate adaptation criteria is more applicable. I think this afternoon in the other panel, one of the panelists had also mentioned that in climate change mitigation, there is like a quantitative indicator, while all the other do no significant harm criteria are defined more softly, and it's more difficult to understand, to have like a yes or no answer if the requirement is actually fulfilled. So here there is also just actually the same point again. If we look at the market, we can see that the market should be expanding their expertise and the capacity in order to collect the relevant data needed, and also to optimize the internal processes to make this data more accessible, especially in purchasing and management processes. And obviously we need to improve our existing building stock, and we need more direct investments in the for the transformation of the building stock. And last but not least, we have we saw that certified buildings comply with data more often and had a higher data reliability, because at the same time this data was more accessible. So we would also recommend that there should be a recognition process in the taxonomy for sustainability certification schemes, and the market can here also recognize the benefits of certifying their buildings, because then you will in the long run have reduced effort in for accessing the sustainability information, and also you have an increased reliability for your taxonomy alignment. We see our role, if we look at the role of green building councils in terms of the taxonomy, we see that because we have a long, we've gained more than 10 years of experience in benchmarking sustainability in buildings, we see our role, a key role in qualifying stakeholders and using our knowledge, which we've accumulated over the past decade, to share this knowledge and see how the taxonomy can be applied more better in the real estate sector, and therefore also specifying or better translating the European regulations in criteria and defining which documents can actually prove the taxonomy alignment. And we also see our role in ensuring that the taxonomy checks have a certain criteria. So we could be, we see our role in ensuring like a third-party verification, similar to submitting the documents to gain a DGNB certificate. We see our role in checking whether a project is taxonomy aligned when stakeholders submit their documents for their projects in terms of the taxonomy requirements. That is also why we have introduced the ESG verification for the EU taxonomy, not only in integrating it into our existing DGNB schemes, but also doing that as a standalone project. So you can see over for the taxonomy, you actually need you need to collect data over the entire building life cycle. So what we have done, here you can see a graph where you can see that we have DGNB certificates over also the entire building life cycle. We have integrated the taxonomy requirements for new construction to the DGNB new buildings system. We've integrated the acquisition and ownership criteria into the buildings in use scheme, and we look at the renovation criteria of the taxonomy in our DGNB renovation scheme. So by certifying according to these DGNB schemes, you can also at the same time look at the taxonomy requirements and not only get the DGNB certificate at the end, but also gain a proof document that you are taxonomy aligned. So in the end, what could we learn with our key question, whether the proposed taxonomy criteria are applicable or not, and whether the market is ready? We learned that it is partly the case. Market participants need to prepare better and also need to optimize their internal structures to gain access to the relevant data. And especially for the European Commission, we can just say that some criteria needs to be specified more clearly so that they are actually applicable in practice, in the practical terms. Obviously it was not just me in this project. I have a list of authors you can contact in the different local green building councils. You can also download the full study from our website. I'm just going to now also briefly show what our activities now are on the European taxonomy. Since the study was published in March, there have been some more changes in the in the EU taxonomy, because the questionnaires we had used for the study were obviously based on the taxonomy requirements from the technical expert group. And now there is a delegated act available. So we have updated these questionnaires to depict the now final taxonomy criteria. And we offer the ESG verification for EU taxonomy, which is both a product from the DGNB itself and also from our partner organization, CPEA in Brussels, where we verify the conformity of buildings to the European taxonomy criteria in the business, in the economic activities, new construction, renovation, and also acquisition and ownership. And we do this for mainly for the environmental objective climate change mitigation. And as I'd already mentioned, there are two different application scenarios we see here. One, if your project is anyway looking for a DGNB certification, you can do the ESG verification while also doing the DGNB certification. Or if your building has not been certified and is not planning to be certified, you can still have your conformity checked and reviewed by the DGNB if you collect all the relevant data. This is in terms that you, if you're interested in this, you will be able to gain more information on our website. But in general, it works that we have prepared a questionnaire which you can fill in for your building with all the taxonomy requirements and also with the proof documents listed, and also evaluating the data reliability of your proof documents. And then if you have, for example, a DGNB certification, we have done a comparison between the taxonomy requirements and also the DGNB system. So you can see which indicators within the DGNB certification need to be fulfilled and where additional documents must be provided to show alignment and to document that the taxonomy requirements are fulfilled. And in the end, you will submit all these documents to us. We will review them, and you will have a 2-page document, you could say, from us, a report on your project, where you can see that the result will be that you're either taxonomy aligned or not, and there is also the depiction on the environmental objective we looked at, and also an in detail report which of the taxonomy criteria you actually are fulfilling or which you are not fulfilling, so that you know where you stand and you know which documents you will need in future to become taxonomy aligned. And that finishes my presentation. Maybe there are already some questions, or maybe we'll go over to the next panel. I'm not quite sure. Gunter, I hand back over to you.
Thank you. Yes, your presentation has stimulated quite a number of questions. Since these questions mainly come from two participants, Mark Edwards and Karen Siraki, I think it's better that I just give them the floor to ask and select which questions to ask, rather than me selecting from their questions in the chat. Yeah. So Mark, do you want to step in? Mark?
Hello?
Oh, yeah.
Hi. Hi, sorry, I'm going through my questions and thinking which is actually the one to ask. I guess one main question is, how are you demonstrating compliance if in countries that don't have or have very limited databases?
So we always need proof documents. We are mainly focusing, so in the study itself, we focused on each GBC was responsible for evaluating the buildings in their countries. And currently we mainly are focusing because we are the German Sustainable Building Council, we are mainly focusing on the German projects. So we have done like an analysis on which documents you need in Germany to submit them. And therefore, if data is not available, we cannot make a classification.
Okay, yeah. So the data missing was a huge part for a lot of them. Mm-hmm. What are the main, just to give me like a really basic idea of like what are the main points of data that are missing?
I think a lot of for existing buildings, especially in Germany, the issue was that they didn't have the right energy performance certificate available because they were mostly consumption based, and because it was a study, they didn't ask someone to conduct a new energy performance certificate, but it was just a status quo assessment. So that's why you would need to invest, or you would need to apply for a new EPC to make the rating. So that was classed as data missing. And then for the do no significant harm criteria, there are just a lot of existing building owners who have not started with doing the climate adaptation, climate change adaptation risk analysis, for example. So then if you haven't done an analysis, then you cannot vote if it's taxonomy aligned or not, because then actually the data is missing to make an assessment.
So you wouldn't be providing that climate risk assessment as like a separate service. They have to go and do that and then come back to you with that climate risk assessment.
Exactly. So we would tell the applicant that this information is missing, for example, and we see ourselves as a third-party verifier, helping in interpreting the taxonomy requirements and understanding and showing which documentation would be required. Because I think there is also still a lot of discussion on that on the market. And then the applicant himself will have to look into gaining all the documentation, and then will submit this documentation to us, and we will do the assessment if it's taxonomy aligned or not, like a third party verifier, you could say.
Okay. So it's really the climate risk report. Not enough investors are doing climate risk reports for their individual.
That was, for example, that was just one example. Yeah. Then in new construction, it's not just a climate risk report. There was also the matter of the pollution aspects. So if you don't, or even the water flow rates, if you don't know about the requirements from the start of the project, you will obviously not ensure what the flow rates are like, or you won't even collect the data for your project. And then it will be too late if the
building's already under construction.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the biggest thing that we're seeing, like buildings that are, you know, coming up to completion. Investors are asking, is it EU taxonomy alignment? And obviously the developers haven't looked at this. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how the market prices that, and if they discount it. It's not their fault, really. I mean, it's so new. That's really interesting. Thank you. And one last question. Sorry, I know I'm taking over. You know, obviously only 15% of the existing buildings are going to be compliant in per country, per sector. So are you able to show the renovation compliance as a possibility? So if you do this and this, you can get compliance on the renovation. Like, is that part of it, or are you just like, no, it's existing, and no, unless they have a renovation plan in place? Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
So if you evaluate a building according to the acquisition and ownership criteria, then it would be either or. We do not evaluate if a renovation is in place, then that would be again not our role in this case. But we can see, like in the final taxonomy criteria, that is also why we are very skeptical with the top 15 approach, because it means that only 15% of the building stock can be sustainable. And we see it, or generally in the taxonomy criteria, there is also the other approach. If you have an energy label class A, then you can also be taxonomy aligned. And we see this is a much better approach, because that means that every building has the opportunity to become sustainable, and you have like a fixed benchmark.
Yeah, there should be an absolute number. Yeah,
exactly, and not this moving target, because otherwise it will only be 15% which will be taxonomy aligned, and the other existing building stock will not be able to become sustainable in terms of the sustainable finance.
And do you think the EPCs, because I know in the moment in some countries, you know, you can have an EPC A and it is linked to consumption, and that's fantastic. But in the UK, for example, there's no link to consumption. Do you see that being like a major task for the EU to kind of just sort out and standardize? It would make things a lot easier.
I think we need both the EPC for primary energy demand and consumption. But we see not the energy consumption as a key figure, but it would be much better to focus on the climate, on the carbon emissions, instead of talking about energy demand and energy consumption. So I think rather than going to another energy KPI, we would prefer a switch to the carbon emission.
Do any of them have carbon emissions?
Well,
now?
I think I have to intervene here.
Okay, yeah. Sorry. Thank you so much.
I would suggest you move this to private professional discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.